Hi, I'm Kirsten and welcome to today's presentation on Introduction to Postcolonial Literary Theory. Let's have a look at what the presentation's outcomes are. The lecture outcomes are: what is colonialism, what is postcolonial literature as a genre, understanding postcolonialism as a literary theory, and examples of postcolonial literature covered in the BAG syllabi. Postcolonial literature as a post-movement. Postcolonialism is indelibly linked to colonialism that preceded it, and so it is useful to understand aspects of the preceding period of colonialism before venturing into postcolonial studies. What is colonialism? Colonialism is the act of one country taking control of another, first by military force or action, then by occupying that nation politically, economically, socially, and culturally. Throughout history, the world has seen many examples of empires, when one country colonizes many others and builds a kingdom, countries or states that come under its ruling. Colonies and empires were built upon the profits of slavery of the colonized population and the exploitation of the country's natural resources. According to McKenney, the colonizer became rich and powerful, whilst the colonized remained subjugated. If you look at colonial discourse, it refers to the way language becomes meaningful when viewed through specific cultural historical frames or lenses. Colonial discourse is specifically derived from Michel Foucault's use of the concept. Discourse was originally used from about the 16th century to describe any kind of speaking, talk, or conversation, but became increasingly used to describe a more formal speech, a narration or treatment of any subject at length, a treatise, dissertation, or sermon. More recently, discourse has been used in a technical sense by linguists to describe any unit of speech longer than a sentence. However, the Foucauldian sense of the term has little to do with the act of speaking in its traditional sense. For Foucault, a discourse is a strongly bounded area of social knowledge, a system of statements within which the world can be known. What can be said of colonial discourse? It's a narrative of the colonizer. Let's look at the process of colonization. Human societies conquer territories and settle in already occupied lands, an inevitable clash of cultural dominance and oppression. Colonization was an imposed reality in Africa, Asia, the Americas, and Europe that lasted between 200 and 300 years. If you look at South African colonial literature, the first fictional works to emerge from South Africa were produced by colonial writers whose attitude to indigenous South Africans was at best ambivalent, if not outright hostile. This is especially true of the writers of adventure-type stories, in which colonial heroes are romanticized and the role of the black South Africans was reduced to that of the enemy of servant. You can see these in stories such as Story of an African Farm, Cry of the Beloved Country, and Mafeking Road. If you look at postcolonial literature as a genre, postcolonial literature is a term applied to the body of literary works created after the colonial era. According to the module guide, this means poetry, novels, plays, short stories, and more written in a time when ideas around national independence and identity dominated social, political, and cultural landscapes. If you look at some of the features of postcolonial literature, the line between colonial past and postcolonial present and future is all too often blurry. Lingering resentments and inequalities stemming from the us versus them mindset that pervaded the colonial period. If you look at the aims and outcomes of postcolonial literature became an endeavor to set oneself apart, redefine and reclaim notions of identity, language, and place. Postcolonialism acknowledges a sense of loss, or at the very least, a sense of cultural interruption. It strives to continue on with the awareness of history in the present milieu. Postcolonialist theory is about accounting for and combating the social, political, and cultural impact of colonialism upon people and countries that were once colonized. Postcolonialism is the critical destabilization of theories, intellectual and linguistic, social and economic, that supported the ways of Western thought by means of which colonialists perceive, understand, and know the world from their own perspective. It addresses the imbalances created by colonization, therefore social implications of colonization. Postcolonialists believe that the effects of colonial empires are still felt by colonial territories, culturally, socially, mainly through the media, politically and economically. To understand postcolonialism as a literary theory, there are 6 key points to consider: binary oppositions, rhizomes, liminality, hybridity, the subaltern, and counter-discourse. So what is binary opposition versus colonial binaries? Binary opposition refers to the balanced relationship that exists between two elements in literature. The colonial binary refers to the attempt made by postcolonialism to reveal the problematic nature of these constructs, to show how power is created, abused, and renegotiated. Therefore, an imbalance exists. If we look at rhizomes in postcolonial theory, we first have to understand what a rhizome is. In botany, a rhizome refers to a root system that spreads across an area, like grass, rather than simply in one direction, like a carrot. In postcolonial theory, the metaphor of the rhizome suggests a view that power is neither created nor found in one centralized place, such as colonial Europe or modern-day USA or China, but is negotiated between a number of factors and therefore is more dispersed. This also suggests that the power attributed to imperialism is oversimplified and perhaps even overestimated. It is the reattribution and renegotiation of power with which much of the post-colonial project is concerned. When we look at liminality as the next key point, it refers to the transitory in-between state or space which is characterized by interdeterminacy, ambiguity, hybridity, and the potential for subversion and change. In literary, post-colonial, and cultural studies, the concept has been successfully adopted to circumscribe a being on the border or on the threshold, dividing distinct spheres, identities, or discourses. So according to Victor Turner on liminality, firstly the subject is stripped of its social status. The subject goes through a transitional phase, which is liminality, marked by anti-structure, chaos, and egalitarian relations between initiants. And thirdly, there is a reintegration with the elevated status. If you look at hybridity, on the other hand, it's the state of quality of being hybrid in nature. In other words, a cross between two races, cultures, languages, etc. Hybridity is one of the key components of the post-colonial theory, characterized by theorists such as Homi Bhabha and Gayatri Spivak. If you look at hybridity and liminality combined, it's the link that Bhabha makes between the liminal and the hybrid is reiterated as a prime mace against oppressive imperial power and grand narratives, as it locates and echoes in-betweeners of the self and the other. If we look at Gayatri Spivak and the subaltern refers to people who are considered to be of a lower status. Spivak's canon Subaltern Speak uses the notion of speaking with both literal and metaphorical meaning. For Spivak, the subaltern is a subject in a society who does not have access to power and infrastructure to be heard. As such, the subaltern is dismissed. They are not given a voice or indeed agency. The subaltern are in turn considered other. The next key point is counter-discourse. Counter-discourse describes the post-colonial project of speaking or writing back to or against the grand narrative of colonialism. In post-colonial texts, counter-discourse is the moment a subject is able to speak for itself rather than just being spoken for. According to the Module Guide of 2016, in being spoken for, a subject is deprived of a chance to define and represent itself. The examples of post-colonial literature covered in the BAG's syllabi is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Athol Fugard's Busman and Lena, James Coetzee's Disgrace, and Jean Rhys's White Sargasso Sea. So in conclusion, to understand post-colonial literary theory, there needs to be a pre-understanding of colonialism and key terms discussed in this presentation.